we have sound, and this is sound. Ladies and gentlemen, director of the film, Jim Bruce. And the anchor and specialist source, I don't know, William White. The idea of this session is that the audience should ask their questions, but I'll try and get the show on the road. This is a beautifully researched and I think very spectacular documentary. We are used in the past years of seeing documentaries on comparable themes, which are much more in the realm of political agitation. Michael Moore, but even in the Inside Job, last year's Inside Job is more sort of a pamphlet, where your film seems to be sort of academic. Is this by chance? Was this what you wanted to do? How did you come to this project?
All the film distributors out there, it's not academic. But my goal in making this film is, and it might be too much to ask for, is to try to change the policies of my own country's central bank. And the lesson of history is that when public opinion swings against the policies that they're enacting, that they will change. They follow public opinion. So I felt like if I made a film that was valid in economic circles, and Bill has just seen it for the first time, so he'll have to tell us if it is or not, that the arguments could be made, that the film could support people who you see on camera like Bill, who are opposing the things Ben Bernanke is doing right now, could support them and could bring some public opinion around the world and in America over to a side that says, hey, we shouldn't be doing these things. So I tried to make a film that's halfway between the general public and these people who sit around a table and decide, you know, the fate of the financial system and the world. That's the goal.
That would be credible to both these audiences, so to speak. Okay. William, now that you've seen the film where you are featuring as an expert for the first time, what did you think of it? I think, yeah, you have under your butt, you have a microphone too. I think, I'm not sure.
Well, I thought the film was beautifully made. I thought that the interaction of the historical pieces with the modern pieces, the experts, the participants, the way in which it was all put together, I thought made a very compelling case. Now, I have to tell you that it was a case that I guess I've been pushing for at least the last 15 years, so you've got a very biased witness. But I enjoyed the film very, very much. As to whether it was academic, in a certain sense, it was pointing to the fact that the Fed, and I have to say, I think the central banks all around the world, in fact, have been operating using the wrong model of how the world works. And I think for a long period of time, and it's brilliantly done in the film, for a long period of time, there has been the sense that more debt is the answer to the problem. And yet, if debt was the thing that got you into the problem in the first place, clearly there's a contradiction here, a logical contradiction. And I think the film makes that point very well. Now, I've been in the business for so long, it's impossible for me to say whether the layman would really appreciate it, but I certainly hope, I think so, and I hope so.
You work at the Bank for International Settlements, which is an OECD institution, or?
Well, the odd thing, I actually was the head of the economics department at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. And this is where all the central banks would come together every 2 months. And we would, for month after month, year after year, we members of the staff would be telling them in a polite way, because they're our shareholders, that they had a real tiger by the tail here, that they were going at it the wrong way. And yet the ideas that they had in their mind were so firmly ingrained that they wouldn't buy into the fact that maybe they were making things worse. And I just really hope that this film, if it can get the public's attention, and Jim is absolutely right, if you can get the public on side, then the institutions and the politicians will deliver what the public wants. And I'm really hoping that that will happen.
How did you get all these distinguished sources to be allowed to be interviewed. Was that difficult? Did you ask Alan Greenspan right away?
Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke both turned us down. There were 2 rejections.
But the others, because there's quite a
yeah,
row of prominent people, right?
It was hard. It took me a long time to, I had to do my research and convince people one by one that I knew what I was talking about enough to want to talk with me. I met with everyone before, except for Bill, who was in Switzerland, and that was too far to go. I met with everyone before I interviewed them to try to reassure them. And to its credit, the Federal Reserve, you know, a lot of people at the Federal Reserve agreed to participate in a documentary that they knew. I told them up front it would be critical, but that I tried to, you know, I said it'll be fair and it'll be economically legitimate. It won't just simply tar and feather them. And so I'm really glad that all the people, I tried to honor, you know, the institution. That I don't think it's necessarily that flawed, but we try to focus on the ideas.
Mm-hmm. Okay, in the audience.
It's interesting that you say you tried to honor the institution. I felt it was a very narrow view that just looked at how we can tweak the institution or have public opinion people go on bended knee and request of those small groups of people how we can shift it and tweak it, as opposed to looking at the full span of history. Why we even have a Federal Reserve from colonial days with colonial script up through Andrew Jackson, who successfully fought against bankers owning and being able to print money, to Lincoln with greenbacks and John F. Kennedy wanting to print our own money. As long as the framing continues to be so narrow that it's just the Federal Reserve and we have to tweak it or ask, please, please, why didn't you open it up publicly so we can see the true lessons of history as you spoke about?
Well, I mean, we tried to get as much of that history as we could into a film that's already quite long.
Where?
No,
It's one-sided. It's like Federal Reserve, let's tweak it.
Well, to me, in the world that I live in, when I ask people on the street in America what they think about Ben Bernanke, most people say, oh, he's doing okay, you know, the stock market's up, my housing prices. I'm just saying there are some of us who are further on the other side of being critical of him, and the goal of this film is to just try to move people a bit. I think getting rid of the Federal Reserve entirely would be a big challenge and a long swing. I think getting better policies from our Federal Reserve, to me, is my, you know, albeit not perfect end solution, but to me it would be a big improvement from what we have today, which is massive policies that I personally disagree with. So I understand you want more. I'm trying to just start it.
We'll never know what the possibility is unless we voice it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the conversation started, but I welcome your carrying it forward the next, you know, further down the road, so to speak. This is a first step, I think.
Leo.
I'm wondering, you know, you portray Alan Greenspan as seen as a god by people around him, but he plays, you know, the Central Bank of America plays such a big role internationally. I wonder how that new guy, that Bernanke, how people approach him, because he seems so self-secured. He never looks nervous. His beard is always fantastic.
Very well trimmed, huh?
You know, he looks perfect. And when they ask him questions like, you think you can control whatever's happening, he doesn't fit, you know, he just says 100%, you know, and I'm like, does he feel kind of the same as Alan Greenspan? Is he treated that way?
With Ben Bernanke, I think he's a little more rational than Alan Greenspan, and this is my guessing of my observation. But it's really hard to know whether he's doing that because he thinks he has to, or that because he's definitely projecting a sense of confidence, trying to reassure, you know, everyone in the world that everything's going to be fine, you know, and that's terrifying because things are just continuing to deteriorate. But it's hard to know. It's one of the big mysteries is whether he believes what he's saying or whether he feels he must say it.
But people around him, do they like the other guy said, it's hard to disagree with God. Do people say things like that about him?
I think from what I know in the central banking circles that the discussions at the Fed now are much more open and two-sided than they were before. Whether the final decisions are any less biased than they were before is another question. As to whether Bernanke really believes in what he's doing, I think he does. He's one of the world's greatest scholars on the Great Depression. He's written all sorts of stuff himself, and he's been responsible for the Fed staff writing a lot of stuff. And the conventional wisdom at the Fed is that the Great Depression was caused by the Fed's interest rate policies at the time, that they made a mistake, and he's determined not to do it again. And whenever they talk about Japan, they don't talk about the absence of structural adjustment and all that stuff in Japan, or the boom that came before the bust. It was because the Bank of Japan didn't ease fast enough at the beginning of the 1990s. So he's got it absolutely in his gut that error, monetary policy error, is what creates these problems, and he has no intention of making that error. I think he really believes it.
Isn't he then doing exactly what all human beings do, overshooting and undershooting, because that's what happens in the markets. So now he has seen what went wrong in the Great Depression, so now he's doing exactly the opposite, which is then also creating a complete overshoot.
Like all good generals, he's fighting, the wrong war. I think that's what we're trying to say in the film, that, what people perceive as solutions and he presents as solutions are really more problem.
Okay.
Let me first commend you on showing a very reputable way of a very abstract problem, making it also understandable for laymen. As somebody working in the financial sector, of course, personally, I think I agree with your diagnosis of some of the speakers that we're in here for another 5 or 7 years with an even more recession. However, I wonder, have you not been able to show anybody, or to get anybody with any sort of a solution, whether it is a shock therapy, higher inflation, or war, or whatever, or is it not your intention to do so? But all of these people speaking in their diagnosis criticize the Fed, but nobody says, hey guys, we should do this or that, whatever, shock or whatever.
Yeah, we didn't, I would like to have a longer film to lay some of these things out, but we're already, I feel, pushing up against the limits of people's attention spans. Bill and I were talking over lunch. There's only one solution, which is you write off bad loans. And whether it's a country that took out debts they can't pay back, or a homeowner, the solution of, there is a solution in capitalism. It's very popular. It's happened throughout history. It's called, bankruptcy or writing off debts, and you just say, you don't keep trying to pay it. Greece, Germany's never going to get money, get all its money back from Greece, and the idea that they're trying to squeeze the Greek population to do that is just absurd. So the answer is quite simple, and you write off the debts, but then that would require the banks that hold those loans to take the losses, and politicians around the world are protecting their banks and prolonging the problem.
But in the case of U.S. government debts, it's hardly, could that be done? Could the U.S. government go bankrupt and write off its debts?
We're going to find out.
Lots of things I got to find out.
I'm not sure when.
I hate to see the day.
So could I just say that on the debt thing, just 30 seconds. If you're a country with your own currency, like the United States, what you do is you continue to print, and eventually it shows up in higher inflation, and it shows up in a lower value of the currency. And all of the US debts are denominated in US dollars. So if your banks here in Holland are holding those dollars, it's those creditors that are going to take the hit as the US devalues. They will always pay, but they will pay in a devalued currency. The Greeks can't do that. And that's the reason why I think Jim is quite right in suggesting people have to face up to the idea that when creditors have lent too much money, the money is gone. Okay, it will never come back, and the sooner you recognize it, the better.
And isn't it then, from that perspective, ridiculous that the United States has been downgraded? Because they can always print, and I think that's the definition. That if you can print, if you can pay, you will be AAA. So
but if you
I
pay
don't
back,
understand the downgrade.
I think they're I mean, the credit agency, the agencies aren't very smart, but they're, I think they're anticipating that where the payback will come in money that's less valuable, so that there is a loss there.
Yeah, but they
Lady over there.
I understood that below the economical crisis is the lack of trust. Now, in your solution, how do you see to regain the trust of the people?
Anyone got that? How to regain trust in the dollar or the system?
No,
yeah. How do you build that back?
Within, yes. How do you build that back?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Bill and I would both recommend is if you acknowledge the losses. If you take, say, a huge bank like Deutsche Bank, really should be run through bankruptcy, and that just, you could say, well, then everyone will be afraid, but it's like, then if you go through that process, and countries have done this before, you know, Sweden did it in the early 80s, or the early 90s. If you actually deal with the problem and address the problem, write off the losses, then it's over and people can look ahead. And what we're living in right now is they're trying to create a state of suspended animation. And I don't think most of us, people understand, I think, on the street that there's something not quite right about this sort of space that we're in the eye of the storm, that things haven't really been fixed. And I think people aren't really fully believing in these so-called solutions that Ben Bernanke might say, oh, the problem's over, you know, everything's fine. People don't really believe that. So I think you have to go through the real hard work, and then people would believe in that we're out the other end and that we're moving forward without those debts. You know?
I hope you're right, but I don't believe you will. Because there's a
Yeah.
lot of corruption.
Lack of trust.
There's a lot of money on the other side of the table. Can we get the guy in the way back? He's been so.
We're standing at the largest financial abyss in my view since humankind has measured or could measure this. So I'm wondering what you see as likely scenarios. One that was mentioned is raising interest rates, which will go against public opinion, and more savings, also on behalf of government, which will also go against public opinion. And secondly, I'd like to attach to that my own opinion, and something that I didn't hear in the film. I think it's inevitable that we will have to redistribute wealth. To start with in the US.
Yes.
And we will have to do it here in Europe too. There's too much imbalance. And to add to that, we, or at least the economists, tended to say that we will be able to grow ourselves out of the problem. I believe that we cannot continue to grow our way out of the problem. I'd like to hear your view on what will be the most likely scenario in the next 2 or 3 years.
I agree with you. I think, to me, the way you grow out of the problem is if you write off the debts, and writing off the debt ultimately, because wealthy banks and wealthy individuals own the debt, that ultimately is your de facto redistribution of wealth that you're talking about. So I think that's the only way. That really is the only way out. You can't grow. Studies and books have been written, especially very recently, about how basically all this debt that we're carrying is a charge against the real economy, and it's like someone trying to run a marathon with a car on their shoulders, and you take the car off, and then they can start running the marathon.
I agree with you in Greece, but for psychological reasons, they cannot yet consent to this, so they can. Privately they'll write it off. But anyway, I'd like to hear your view on the US. Because
in your film, by the way, you seem more than advocate writing off debt. You seem to suggest that higher interest rates might be a sensible way.
Bill should field this one, because you sort of have that theory that Bill's a whole concept of how we could potentially try to recalibrate the global economy through incentives.
I think the scenarios looking ahead, this is a film about the United States, and an excellent portrayal of what happened in the United States. But I do want to point out that these very low interest rates have been a feature of virtually every country you can think of. And the upshot is that there's all sorts of other places other than the US where the debt problem is a very serious problem. And I don't have to tell Europeans about that. You know. The situation in Japan is, of course, we've been saying it's critical for 10 years. China is the next thing on the radar because there's been huge expansion of debt in China, mostly on the part of local authorities, whatever. So there's a real issue out there. And I think the question, if we think about how do you get out of it, one part of it has got to be debt write-offs. Another part of it has got to be major structural reform so that people can get out ahead of the, so that people can increase the potential growth of the economy and have a greater capacity to service the debt that remains. I think in a lot of countries there's room for a lot more public sector infrastructure. And I think globally there is some room for people who've got the capacity to expand fiscal policy and whatever to do so. But all of that stuff has to happen in a sense, and maybe this is sort of something missing from the film. The interest rates, to raise interest rates, which is going to be contractionary in the first instance, without having the promise of these other policies, which are in the hands of governments, okay, they're not in the hands of the central bank. Raising the interest rates is not going to happen without those other things. And that's why I think it's very important that the governments get the message. There's hard things to be done here. And of course, what is very clear in the film is that as long as people believe that the Fed is the solution to the problem, the people who have the true solution to their problems are not going to do anything.
As much as I agree with you with writing off the debt on Greece, you cannot do it simply for the fact that, you know, it will offer the Merkel put to Spain and Italy. It will be the exact same thing as the Bernanke and the Greenspan put that were
things are heating up. But I'd like to sort of distribute the word around the other gentleman over there.
We had a contingent here from the Dutch Central Bank, actually, so...
welcome.
I think I speak for all of us when I say that the film was very interesting and that I enjoyed it a lot. From what Bill White just said just now, I mean, there's obviously a link between monetary policy in the U.S. that it's shown in the film and around the world. But one thing that every central bank deals with is that I mean, there's central bank independence, but you always are dealing with government policy, with fiscal policy, structural policies that you don't have very much control over. And in a crisis, really, the central bank is the only institution that's able to, provide short-term safety net, and the long-term really doesn't have much power. But do you see the same problem in Europe, or do you have interesting parallels between the situation here shown with the Fed and the ECB, for example? Or
I think it's the problem in Europe is quintessentially the same as it is in the United States. But in the United States, what happened was that the very low interest rates encouraged a flow of money to people who couldn't afford it, subprime, blah, blah, blah. And in here, what happened was almost exactly the same thing, which is that the people who had the savings, the Dutch, the Germans, the Finns, and the others, they lent the money to people in the periphery for purposes that were inappropriate. And that was never the ideal. That was never the idea when Europe first started. The whole idea was that the money would flow for productive purposes in the countries that were behind, and then everybody would be buoyed up. Fundamentally, it's the same thing, I think.
Well, the thing is, of course, that at the moment we don't have a European Central Bank. I mean, we have a European Central Bank, but not with possibilities comparable to the Federal Reserve. Should we go for a European Central Bank with extended possibilities and powers?
That's another Bill question.
No, but Jim, I mean, this is very much part of your film. When you go back to the beginnings of central banking, this is true for the Bank of England, for the Riksbank, and you make it very clear about the Fed. The purpose for which these central banks were set up was to preserve financial stability. They weren't set up to sort of monitor and manage the entire macroeconomy. They were sent up for purposes of maintaining financial stability.
Not true.
And frankly, the
Not
idea,
true.
the
They were
idea
set up
that in
to
the
steal the money from the people.
that's an even
Who owns
an even
who
deep.
owns the Federal Reserve? Private bankers. It's not true that they
Well, let me just say with Alan Greenspan, I disagree with you fundamentally. But the point I want to make here is that in the United States and in other countries, the primary purpose of the central bank was to maintain financial stability. And the idea that the ECB should not be doing that because it's supposed to be focused on price stability, I think shows a complete disregard for history.
But Bill, who
Can I
are the
ask one
shareholders
more
of
question?
the Federal Reserve Bank?
I would like to know the rating agencies in America. They're rating like the bonds in Greece and Spain as well, and they're rating them real low, whereas their own junk derivatives, they all got A+ or AA just
Yeah,
before
they don't have a
COVID,
good track
you
record.
know.
You don't want to rely on them for anything.
Who owns the Federal Reserve?
Right.
Come
on.
As described
Who owns the
everyone
Federal
else.
Reserve?
Ik ben Danish.
It's extremely.
I'm not
Chairman.
finance business. I'm the general public.
Yep.
So actually, I'm curious about the lady in front. She said that the Federal Reserve was owned by private bankers. So
Still,
I
Yeah.
don't know it. Please, can you answer that question?
Yeah, I can. It's too complicated to fully answer because it's a very weird setup, and it is the interesting thing I would say is that the money that they make a lot of money because they can print money for nothing and then buy bonds with it. So we'd all do well if we could do that. They pay their expenses and then they return the rest of it to the U.S. Treasury. So the profits from the central bank don't go to the private banks, but it was originally set up to be owned by the banks. Basically paid in. It was like almost like a co-op or something like that. So to join for your bank to be part of the system, you had to put in capital.
There's not an affiliate bank in every republic.
It's also very funny. You see the map. I don't know how well everyone knows American history, but it was made in 1913. So the distribution of the bank. There's 12 regional banks. It's very odd. There's 2 in Missouri, which I think was part of getting some votes from someone from Missouri. And so it's a very archaic and odd situation. Absolutely. And there you could certainly say let's get rid of it and all these other things. Again, our film is trying to move the ball. It's trying to just get people to think that Ben Bernanke propping up stock prices and house prices is not something good for them. The average American, unfortunately, I think, still believes that, and so he still has the political, ultimately, backing to continue doing what he's doing and to be very bold.
Shouldn't banks stay out of the stock market? I mean, there's been talk about this here.
Absolutely.
Shouldn't banks be forbidden from speculating in the stock market? Hasn't that been one of the big problems?
Yeah, I mean,
assets driving up the price of assets
and I would say the biggest problem is not necessarily that banks have done these things. It's that after they've done them and failed, we've decided, oh, now we have to save the banks. I mean, there's just no reason. That's the real problem, I think.
Well, on the one hand, you save the banks, and you say, okay, these are too big to fail, we understand that. But on the other hand, you say, the price for that is that you can never ever speculate on the stock market again. You take away their incentive of the money sharks to, go more money.
That's one way to do it, but Paul Volcker has a rule that he proposed that was watered down by President Obama and his people.
Reinstating the Glass-Steagall.
He was trying to do that. I think the problem with history is that banks have a lot of political power, and so you say, after you save them, you say, well, but we're going to put a tight leash on you. 5 years later, the leash is gone, and so it really helps to let them fail.
That was the law. The laws were changed. Under, I don't know whom.
Glass-Steagall.
Under Clinton.
Yeah, under
There
Clinton.
was deregulation.
Yes.
So you do it yourselves. I mean, the United States, you keep on talking like, oh, these people made a bad mistake. I mean, we're not talking about high school children or primary school children. These are people who make a claim that they are big economics, that they are intelligent, and they, you know, they freaking rule the whole financial system, and they're not even going to jail.
Yeah.
Put everybody
Although
in
there's
jail. The United States has so many people in jail.
to be honest, this is not a particular problem. Because in Holland too, people are advocating separating investment banks from normal banking, and there is no political basis or nothing in the new government program that will actually implement.
You are being impolite. I was not finished.
There's no reason to be
I
polite.
don't think it's funny because it's also my money going down the drain. I don't think it's funny.
Where is my money? Shall we perhaps take two more questions, because we have to, there will be a lot of film in this cinema afterwards. The lady over there.
You show your film to the audience in order to get their mindset to, you know, understanding what's going on. But I think people already know what's going on. I mean, we had a worldwide Occupy movement, which I think affected zero to politics. Why do you think now politics would care what people think?
I certainly think we're definitely not there yet, you know, and I definitely agree with some of the ideas of the Occupy movement, but you know, I think there's a lot more work to be done. I mean, I think ultimately people there's been a lot of talk about bailouts and this and that. There's a basic assumption that has been, I think, people buy into, which is this idea that Ben Bernanke says, you know, if by helping out Wall Street, we're helping out Main Street. By saving the banks, we're helping everyone, and that because if we let the banks fail, we hurt everyone. And I think as long as people believe that, he'll be allowed to keep doing what he's doing, which is subsidizing and pumping money into the financial system. So I think the big thing is we're trying to create a different perspective on those things, you know.
You know, there has been a lot of progress made. I mean, nowhere near as much as I personally would like with respect to reining in the banking system and reining in the big banks, but a lot has been done. I mean, profits of these big outfits have gone way, way down. There have been thousands of layoffs coming down the road. It's taken a long time. I think immediately after the crisis, it looked like it was back to business as usual. But I've got the feeling at the moment that particularly on the investment side, it's not business as usual. And think about UBS, for example. They've just decided they're going to get rid of 10,000 employees worldwide, and a number of other banks are behaving in the same way. Because the regulations are just making it uneconomical to do a lot of the stuff that they did in the past. But the theme of the film here is that as long as the interest rates are as low as they are, it actually does maintain the zombie-like characteristics of both the banking system and the production system, and that's not good for anybody.
Do you see potential successor to Bernanke?
That's a good question. Do you see anyone? I'm curious myself. Part of my goal in releasing the film as soon as we can is I hope to change public opinion in the U.S. about Ben Bernanke himself. But I'm not sure who a successor would be. His vote is for Tom Honig, who is the Kansas City guy. Right now, politically?
How is this film going to be shown in the U.S.? Is it a film for cinemas or TV?
We don't know yet. We hope to have a small theatrical run, and then everywhere possible, TV, DVD, online. We hope to get it out as widely as we can.
You didn't produce it under the auspices of
no, it's totally independent.
We're not sponsored by the Federal Reserve.
Sadly, we've been begging for money for the last 2 years.
Although it could have been, because it's part of a civilized institution.
Did you show the film to the Federal Reserve?
No, this is the world premiere that we've had this weekend. But I do hope. Bill's skeptical as to whether they'll come, but I do hope to get at least a number of the regional reserve banks to hold screenings, because I think some of them have different ideas, and they'd be willing to show the film.
Last question.
Yes, I have a question on what you expect now to happen, because you're more or less advocating kind of anti-cyclical policy that should slow down the economy, which is already more or less slowed down because of the idea. So I was wondering how you would see the end of this if you see a hard crash, or a soft landing and continuation of a moderation policy.
I think a slow descent is the most likely actual thing that's going to happen. Just slower and slower growth. I think we're heading into a global recession. I think the U.S. will turn out to have been in a recession right about now, and all of Europe's in a recession. So Japan's economy is contracting, so it's the entire developed world. So I think we're going to have another global recession. And the last time we had one, central banks did all these things and governments did all these things that they won't be able to do. So I think it's going to be a long slog. I don't think there's going to be necessarily an instant crisis, but we're sort of marching towards problems.
What would the Federal Reserve likely do in such a case?
I mean, the point we try to make in the film is that they've used all their power to the extent they had some. I would say right now it's just psychological, and it's only sort of group behavior in the U.S. stock markets and financial markets is propping up the U.S. There is this belief in the U.S. stock market that Bernanke can pull a rabbit out of his hat. So they kind of used all their power and they've exhausted it. So I think they'll be trying to do more of the same, but I think we've seen it less and less effective.
No reason for optimism.
Sorry.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for a beautiful film. We enjoyed it, and